Before the video starts, I really want to thank all of the support and new subscribers I've been getting lately. It really means a lot, and I really do love each and every one of you for taking the time out of your day to watch my stupid little videos. It really means the world to me, and you have no idea. If you like more disturbing content like this that I find, please subscribe, as it means a lot to me. Thanks, bye. Around 3 months ago, I discovered my favorite splatterpunk book that I've read to this day, and it still beats out all of the other videos I've made on any other splatterpunk books. That book is called Playground by Aron Beareguard, and I really love it. Well, recently I needed some more splatterpunk books to read for videos, so I found Beareguard's other books. And this one we are reviewing today seems to be one of the most popular books in the entirety of the splatterpunk genre. And although I don't like it as much as Playground, other people seem to think that this one is much better and one of the best in the genre. So I figured I would make a video on it as well. And I still do like the book. The book, if you haven't read the title, is called The Slob. And I truly believe that this is probably one of the most gross out, disgusting books I've ever read. It's not necessarily the most disturbing in my opinion, but it's certainly disgusting. There is also a small drawing to go with every chapter, so I will show it on screen as it shows it in the book. As always, make sure to read the book before you watch this video, as it really is best experienced for yourself. And we will be doing a summary and an analysis at the end of the video. I hope you all enjoy the video, and let's get right into that summary. We start with the main character looking at a carpet, wondering how it all came to this. She is beaten and battered, her face and body covered in bruises and wounds. She tries to remain sane as she thinks about the guy who put her here and how he looked so sad. Someone that couldn't do anything by himself is what she thought. And he was capable of all of this? Her mind races thinking about Daniel. Thinking of Daniel is the only thing keeping her sane now. Her body is begging her mind for death, but she continues all of this for Daniel. She looks to the other side of her impromptu prison to see another girl in the room. She is bloody and has a black garbage bag over her head with a small breathing hole. The main character then looks down and sees bugs crawling all over the floor. She wonders if these were her captor's pets or something. They look overfed and fat. The bedroom she was in was void of any of the comforts of a normal bedroom. No love or relaxation remained here. Just disgust. Blood and filth all around. She then gets a flash of memory. She wonders if this is like in the movies when the main character's life flashes before their eyes. She was always a clean freak, ever since childhood. When she was really young, like before kindergarten, she lived in squalor with her family. Though, at the time, she didn't know that. It was just normal. Filthy dishes filled the sink. Not an inch of the bottom of the sink was visible. Piles of clothes were just piled all over with no real rhyme or reason. Rats and mice, I still don't know the difference between the two, are dead all over the floor, and pellets of poop line the kitchen floor. Just various things are all over the house that don't seem to have any purpose. She only realized how disgusting her living situation was when she went over to a friend's birthday party and saw an actual normal house. The house wasn't abnormally clean or anything, but to her, it was. There weren't useless knickknacks all over for no reason. Everything seemed to have a purpose. All the plates and dishes were in the cabinet, and you could actually see the floor. One day, at lunchtime in kindergarten, she found a bug in her lunchbox. She squished it before any of her friends noticed. She just stared all of lunch period at this smushed gray and brown innards of this poor insect. She noticed that she wanted to keep this away from her friends, and this was the first time she discovered she was ashamed of the filth that her and her family lived in. From that day forward, she vowed to be different. So at the very young age of 5 years old, she started cleaning her entire house of filth. Where normal children at that age would be playing games and socializing with friends, Vera, the main character's name, was learning how to clean a house all by herself. And it took her literal years to clean her own house. She was so ashamed she never even found a break to do anything else but clean in her day-to-day life. Every minute of every day was dedicated to cleaning her house. She knew that she could never have a sleepover or a slumber party with friends or a birthday party at her house because kids are ruthless. They would find and exploit anything and everything they could if they found it out about you. If any kid found out that she lived like that, they would never let her hear the end of it and ostracize her. Cleaning the house was not easy for Vera. Her family was truly the problem. And not that it was their fault necessarily, but they certainly didn't make it easy for a young girl to completely clean a house. Her father, a survivor of World War II and a Purple Heart medal recipient from when he got his leg blown off by a machine gun, was the biggest problem. He had PTSD and depression, and despair had seeped into his very bones. He would usually spend his days sitting on the couch, smoking cigarettes and watching political dramas, not bothering to clean anything and just shoving cigarette butts and ash everywhere. Her mother was not much better. She wasn't as bad off as her dad, but the despair that had seeped into her father's bones had almost infected her mother as well, making her feel the very same complacency as her dad. Her sister, Lisa, was also not in a great state. She had wanted to hurt herself from as long as Vera could remember. However, years would pass and Vera made some progress cleaning the house. The house was still filthy, but it was a lot better. You could actually start to see the floor, and plates and dishes began going in the correct places finally. Rats and or mice no longer showed up. Though time had eased the filth, the minds of her family stayed the same. Except for her sister, who got even worse. Lisa was quite a few years older than Vera, and when she turned 21, it got a hell of a lot worse on her mental state. She already had dark thoughts, but now coupled with alcohol, that made things so much worse. Now was Lisa not only depressed, but angry as well. No door in the house would lock anymore, due to Lisa kicking them all down at one point or another. Eggshells had to be constantly walked over when she was home, because just one glance could set her off. Their mother didn't want to call the police on Lisa over any of her meltdowns, as Lisa had BPD. She was worried that calling the police might help, or it might hurt things beyond repair for Lisa. She had already tried to end her own life on several occasions, even being declared medically dead several times, only to be brought back with the worst look of sadness and disappointed on her face as she was revived. Vera would lie awake at night, seeing her sister in her head with her eyes bloodshot and her throat ripped apart by her own screams. Their mother wanted to institutionalize Lisa, but this was 1969. Mental health facilities weren't exactly good back then. I mean, they aren't great now, but back then it was really bad. The unfortunate denouement happened one day that ended exactly the opposite of her usual outbursts. It wasn't a long and angry fight, just a sad and little instant. Their mother came home one day after a day of work, just to find Lisa dead, in bed with a bullet through her head. They never found out where she even got the gun. They used to joke that they made sure to keep anything that could be used to hurt herself out of the house at all times, and at Thanksgiving they had to carve the turkey with a dull butter knife. Her mother and her would joke about how it would be an interesting dinner conversation if they found out. But that was life. You had to laugh, otherwise you'd cry. That is one of my favorite quotes from this book, by the way. Vera's mother was obviously devastated. No parent should have to bury their child. The funeral was strange in the worst way, because although they would never say it out loud, or even admit it to themselves, that they were in a way happy it was over, as horrible as it was. Lisa was no longer suffering, and their lives could now be somewhat easier. Not that anyone would ever say that out loud. When they got home from the funeral, the house was, for the first time in years, quiet, though none of them knew how to cope with the silence. Vera did the only thing she knew how to do: clean. The bad thing is that her sister had left a mess behind in her room. Vera explains that something that no one ever says in shows or movies is when the police or paramedics come to pick up a body, they only grab the body. They don't clean anything up. And Vera had shot herself in the skull. Bits of viscera and blood and brains were all in a smear on the wall. Lisa's eyeball and meaty innards of her head were lying in a heating vent and just marinating in there. The clean job, however, was surprisingly fast. She thanked her brain for keeping all of her body parts on the inside as she cleaned, and she actually managed to clean the entire room rather quickly, though it felt like a lot longer. The rugs, however, were nearly impossible to clean, and those took months. From that day on, not only was this house clean, it was spotless. Vera had to keep the house that way to keep herself from remembering the past. The next chapter opens up with a description of the Bissell self-contained 1632 model vacuum cleaner, which to my amazement is a real thing. It's on this screen right now, which it doesn't look like a vacuum to me, but what do I know? I barely passed 4th grade. It goes on and on about how amazing this vacuum is, how it can get the toughest stains out of the dirtiest carpets, with no hose attached either, which is pretty cool. Little did Vera know, though, that this vacuum right here might in fact be the literal death of her. She would have never gone to the store and bought one, but as luck would have it, one came to her. Vera opened the door about 10 years later to see a grimy door-to-door salesman with this particular vacuum right next to him, though the salesman wasn't very good at his job. He had a suit that was a little too big and he smelled like grime mixed with Old Spice and cigarettes. This salesman somehow managed to give the worst possible presentation and more distracted Vera from the amazingness of this vacuum rather than show what it was capable of. Daniel, Vera's husband, rolled his way into the entryway to see what all this noise was about. You see, Daniel, like Vera's father, was a war veteran who was in a wheelchair. Daniel lost the use of his legs on April 30th, 1975, which coincidentally is about 50 years almost to the date that this video is going up. It was at Saigon Airport in Vietnam. It's also the day that most people would say that the South Vietnamese, and by extension, the United States, lost the Vietnam War in Saigon. The North Vietnamese forces were just outside the city and closing in on the airport. Most people would say that the final United States casualties of the war were 2 men in a helicopter who died from a rocket blast, though Daniel would also say that he was the last casualty of the war, as when the rocket hit those 2 men, a piece of shrapnel exploded off from the rocket and hit Daniel in the spine. Didn't kill him, but paralyzed his legs for the rest of his life. He thinks that it was unbelievably unlucky, and it could have been prevented several times. He was one of the last birthdays to be within the cutoff date for the Vietnam draft, and after his paralyzation, he fell into a deep depression, and the extreme fast pace of war slowed to a snail's pace for Daniel after. He had nothing left to do but think about how almost comical it was that he was so unlucky. So Daniel took to the bottle, and after a long time, when he wanted to change something, he went to Alcoholics Anonymous, which just so happened to be the place where Vera was volunteering at the time. The fact that Vera never saved her father from his depression made her feel extreme sympathy for Daniel. She felt a weird, almost duty-like feeling to help him. And Daniel was an extremely attractive man, though he was a depressed Vietnam War veteran and in a wheelchair, so with how the world was in the late 70s and 80s, not a lot of people wanted to be friends with this poor man. When he first rolled into AA, he looked so defeated, pitiable, but Vera took a liking to him immediately. A quote, handicapped heartthrob, as she says. At first, he seemed so reluctant to even be there, but Vera would keep talking to him. He wouldn't say anything or even react to her, though. Slowly, Vera tried something new. She told dirty jokes. He was a dude, after all, and what dude doesn't like dirty jokes? She tried over and over, and once she saw the corners of his mouth slightly curl upwards. This was it. She had to bring out her biggest and best joke. She asked him, what did the cannibal do after he dumped his girlfriend? He wiped his ass. It was such a stupid joke that it got him. He burst out laughing, and from that day forward, she felt like she was in a romantic comedy. She wonders why Daniel stayed quiet so long. He was so attractive and funny. She said, although yes, at first she talked to him because he was good looking, and she pitied him and felt obligated to talk to him because of her dad, after that day, all of that disappeared. They were like good friends immediately, and obviously one thing led to another and they started dating. After a while, Vera started to work in a hotel, and Daniel hated it, but he couldn't do anything while Vera was working. He was effectively a house husband, which is a dream job of mine, but Daniel felt useless. How could he not? One day, Daniel fell out of his wheelchair and Vera ran up to go help him, when he gritted his teeth and used all his strength to lean on the couch and pull out a ring and asked Vera to marry him. It was the happiest day of both of their lives, and after this, of course, Vera became pregnant as well. Daniel couldn't use his legs, but he could still have sex and get her pregnant. However, they then realized they needed more money if they were going to have a kid. Daniel then decided he wanted to sell his nice car that his dad had left him, but Vera wouldn't let him. The car meant way too much to Daniel, and she knew that. So she decided to pick up extra shifts at the hotel, to Daniel's dismay. They already didn't have a ton of time together, and this made it even worse. Until one day, Daniel finally agreed. And then by the grace of God, this salesman with the world's best vacuum and the world's worst fit appeared on her doorstep. And Vera thought of a plan. Vera lets the salesman into the house. Daniel confused by this. Their funds were already low, and she was pregnant. Why did she let him in? Vera thinks to herself that this isn't just a vacuum. It's almost like a medication. She remembers the flesh, blood, and viscera she had to clean up when she was a child. And this salesman was really bad at his job. However, when he finally got it figured out, he showed how the vacuum was quite impressive, showing a white carpet underneath the normal muck of a normal carpet, even with the cleanliness that the house usually had. Vera buys it, and before he leaves, she asks for the salesman's card. Daniel rightly comes up after and asks, why does Vera think having a luxury item like that would be a good idea to buy when a kid is on the way? But Vera answers a question with a question. Why do you think they sent him to sell that vacuum? A product for women sold by women seems like a logical sell. So why a man? Daniel says, well, maybe it's just safer for a man to go door to door. Well, Vera says that these vacuums literally sell themselves. If this dogshit salesman could sell it to them, then imagine what a woman who really knows about cleaning could sell. Daniel says that if she keeps talking like this, he's just going to sell the car. Vera says no, this is a very smart plan. She called into the place on the card and got an interview, and they agree to hire her, but warns her that this could be dangerous. It's a door-to-door salesman job. But in the end, she gets the job. It's $20 per unit sold and an extra $20 every 3 units sold. Pretty good. She came home and told Daniel. She thinks she can do it, even as heavily pregnant as she is. They argue a bit, but they compromise that Vera can do this for just 1 week to see how it goes. She is pregnant after all, but during this agreed upon week, she sells like crazy. She meets with wives who instantly buy it when shown a competent saleswoman, and the fact that the vacuum was amazing made it even easier. Even single men bought it from her, as they all flirted with her as she was a decently good-looking woman. She got home and told Daniel that their problems might be over. Look at all this money. She tells Daniel that she's going to continue. He hates this, and they argue a bit more, but Vera says that he could never really say no to her, you know. 1 more week. Then she would retire forever, and she would become a full-time mom. Their problems would be over after this week, though. During this second week, she sold and sold tons of money, so much so that everyone in this city almost had a vacuum sold by Vera. So Vera had to go somewhere else in the country, on the outskirts of the city. She just had to sell 1 more to make it an extra 3 for that extra $20. She was heavily pregnant at this point, and she really wanted that extra $20. So she went to the country like she said. Vera made her way down the road to the countryside. The road turned to dirt and gravel instead of normal road, and she noticed there weren't any other houses around for maybe a mile. When she stopped out of the car, she looked and saw a big farmhouse. Bars on all of the windows and wood paneling, with a huge barn out back. The place was also filthy. It looked like it could use a good clean. This should be an easy sell, Vera thought. She rang the doorbell with the Bissell in tow, and she smelled the owner of the house before she saw him. It smelled disgusting. Way worse than that poor salesman who came to her door a couple weeks ago. The man opened up the door, and she saw him. He had disgusting teeth, a huge beer gut, long hair down to his kneecaps. However, he was still balding at the same time somehow. He looked like he tried to dress himself very poorly. He had a white wife beater on, which was no longer white, but pale yellow due to his sweat, and he had steel-toed boots on, one of which was missing the steel part of the steel-toed boot, where she could see that one of his toenails was ripped off like that one disgusting scene in SpongeBob. It was disgusting. His face was the worst part. There was sweat and grime, and they clogged all of his pores, blackheads, whiteheads, and any other type of heads, foaming with pus and little hairs. Each nostril also had a good amount of hair coming out of it. Although he was disgusting and smelled horrible, but to Vera that would just mean this would be an easy sale. But one thing was for sure, this guy was a slob. She gave him her usual speech about how great the Bissell was, and she asked for his name, to which he didn't say anything and just smiled and let her in. I guess he was interested. They walked in together, and he turned around and locked the door. Although Vera didn't feel like she was in any danger at all. This guy seemed gentle. Despite his appearance, he seemed okay, and maybe even a little pitiable. She always liked the downtrodden. Maybe he had some mental condition. Maybe he couldn't dress himself and didn't have anyone to care for him. It made Vera feel really bad about what she thought initially, and they went up the stairs when Vera said that she wanted to show him the power of the vacuum on the carpet stairs, but he motioned her to just continue on and use it in the bedroom. She started to get confused, but she just wanted to get her money and leave at this point. He took out a key ring and fiddled with it a bit and tried to open the bedroom door. When he did, Vera asked if he was sure he didn't want her to clean the stairs carpet instead. That place probably has a little more foot traffic. He stares at her and points to the carpet on the other side of the bed. Whatever, I guess, she thought. She started walking over, unknowing that that was the worst mistake of her entire life. Vera's sense of smell has been messed up for years now. When she was little during a Little League game, she was behind a batter once and the batter swung and clocked Vera's nose really hard on the backswing. It made an explosion of blood on her face. I guess it hit her just right. But ever since, her smelling hasn't been so great. Even while pregnant like she is now, her smell isn't much better like a normal pregnant woman. This was yet another thing that was like the perfect storm of putting her in this situation. If she had smelled it, she might not have come upstairs. From behind the bed, she could see it and it brought her right back to when her sister killed herself. She sees a puddle of viscera and skin and bone, just lying on the floor as if it were a normal pile of clothes. Vera knew this was a bad idea immediately, but she screamed when she saw this purple pile of hamburger meat. How could she not? But just as a half of a second of a scream came out of her, the slob backhanded her to the ground and she fell into a pile, and a tooth or a bone or something scraped her arm and cut it open. She felt like she was in Little League all over again now. She could only look at the ceiling while in this daze. The yellow ceiling, which looked like it was stained from tobacco smoke. She never smoked in her life, but man, right now would she like a cigarette. When she looked back up at the slob, he was putting on some yellow gloves, and probably the ones he used to cut up that poor woman. He grabbed the decapitated head from the pile of hamburger meat and cut around the scalp slowly. He then put his knee onto the top of it and with great force ripped off the scalp of the decapitated head. It crushed the skull in the progress, but he did get the scalp. He then took the scalp and threw it in a garbage bag, which had some other stuff in it as well, and started to walk away when it looked like he remembered something, and he turned back, grabbed Vera's purse, and threw it in the garbage bag too. As he walked out of the room, he looked down at the Bissell and kicked it over to Vera, where he said his very first words to her. "Clean it." He then slammed the door and locked it. Vera bawled to herself silently as not to upset the slob further. She looked around the room for hours and cried to herself about how she was so stupid. She didn't even bring the pepper spray that Daniel had bought her because she figured she wouldn't need it. This kind of thing doesn't actually happen to people. It's something you hear about but never could really happen to you. She decided that there was no way out. The windows, although she could see out of them, were barred shut. She thought maybe, 1 in a million chance, that if she cleaned up the biological matter in the carpet like he said, he would let her go. So she got to cleaning, and it wasn't easy. It took several passes over with the Bissell to get all the blood and gunk and fleshy stuff out of the carpet. Which, by the way, I feel like this entire book is a weird advertisement for this Bissell because I sort of want one now. Right as she finished, he came stumbling back up the stairs and unlocked the door. He brought her a piece of meat that was comical looking, like it was in a cartoon or anime or something. It was a large piece of meat that was sticking off of the bone, with some gravy stuff on top. "Eat it," he says. Vera tells him to wait. She begs him. She says that she cleaned the mess and she promises not to tell anyone about this, because after all, she cleaned it too. She was complacent, right? So just let her go. She won't tell anyone. Without even saying anything else, he shuts the door again and locks it. She looks out the window and sees the slob take the car keys from her purse and put them in her car and drives off. No one would ever know she was there now without her car out front. All night, Vera stays awake to think about all the horrible ways that he might hurt her, so she didn't sleep. And she obviously did not eat the meat. Who knows what it was. The next morning, she heard 2 sets of footsteps coming up the stairs. The door flung open and the slob threw in another woman, a black garbage bag covering her head with a mouth hole, although she had blood smears all over her. He throws this girl to the ground and picks up the meat on the bone. He takes a bite of it and it's extremely tough. Who knows what kind of meat this was? The obvious thought is it's human meat, but it's never really said as far as I'm aware. Flies circle around the slob and the meat, and he extends the meat out to Vera as if to offer her a bite. She politely declines, but he reacts normally and slams her head into the bed frame over and over and over until she blacks out. When she wakes up, she notices that she's tied down. Her pants are off, and the only thing she's wearing is a Billy Idol t-shirt, which, by the way, White Wedding's a banger. She feels weird, and then she realizes what's wrong. Something is inside of her. Right now. Exactly where you think it is. It is literally the meat on the bone. Vera thinks that she is literally getting raped by the bone and the meat of a dead woman right now. She looks up and sees the slob standing over her. The other girl in the chair watching through the garbage bag on the other side of the room. As soon as she gains a little bit of clarity, for some reason, the slob slaps the shit out of her yet again and again. He then takes a hold of the bone inside of her and swirls it around in a disgusting motion. The meat is still on the bone, and he pulls it out and it's covered in leukorrhea, which, by the way, don't look up what that means. He then sticks the meat out to offer it to Vera yet again. At this point, she doesn't want to piss him off anymore, so Vera devours the meat, as disgusting as it is. Adrenaline is the only thing getting her through this visceral task. He then says, "Dessert?" as if asking her a question. Okay, here's a warning. This scene's pretty fucked up. One of the worst I've ever read, so be warned. He bends down and picks up a very heavy barbell. Vera is confused because this guy doesn't look like someone who would work out. Only then he rapidly and forcefully smashes the barbell down on Vera's pregnant belly. Over and over. It dents her stomach over and over. Her stomach tries to sort of keep its shape in a way, but with over 20 blows, it cracks her ribs open, and by the end, there's not a doubt in Vera's mind that her and Daniel's child is dead. The future life in her belly is now little more than puree leaking out of her holes. While the physical toll on her body was impossibly great, the mental one was way worse. How can one imagine losing a future child in this way? She would no longer watch the child be born. She would not teach them to ride a bike. No bedtime stories, all gone in an instant. After this visceral attack, the slob takes his entire arm and sticks it inside of Vera and just swishes it around. I have zero clue how Vera is alive, by the way, at this point, but he grabs some sickly combination of amniotic fluid, gore, and innards of the fetus and pulls out a handful. He then sticks this handful into Vera's mouth and force feeds her. She was already gasping for air and swallowing blood by the gallon from her broken bones and broken nose, and now she just feels like she's drowning in her own blood. He rips her jaw open and feeds her more and more of her dead fetus. He says, "Now it's time to clean up." He bends down and grabs the nozzle of the Bissell and sticks it inside Vera. He uses the steamed water from the vacuum and it all spills out of her in a red, watery mixture. He then throws Vera to the ground and tells her to clean up. When she almost tries to pick up the vacuum and half-consciously leans on the ground for a few seconds, she collapses from the pain. Vera blacks in and out throughout the night until she finally wakes up and realizes that the vacuum somehow got unplugged. She thought she heard voices throughout the night, but she thought at this point if she wasn't hearing voices, it would probably be weird after all of that. But then she realized that it's the lady with the bag over her head in the corner. The lady asks to take the bag off. Please. Vera says how does she know that she isn't with him? She tells Vera to take the bag off and it will be proven quite easily. Vera goes over and takes off the bag to see that her face is all bloody. Her scalp is gone and her lips are just missing. This woman asks Vera to imagine where the slob sewed her lips. It's an extra pair where there already is some, let's say that. She says that he also took her scalp and keeps it. He chews on it like a dog toy. She hopes that he'll choke on a hairball someday. She says that she has a plan though. This guy, he isn't that smart. He's just brutal. She says there's a gun cabinet and there's a good chance there's a gun in it. However, it's locked. She says she's been here for weeks and this guy keeps the girls that he quote-unquote likes. She heard when Vera got here yesterday, and she's been here for a while, but she's seen tens of women come in here and only 1 or 2 last week. But remember, she has a plan. She then bends down and, well, There's no way else to say this, but she kind of just poops on the floor. She apologizes for how gross this is, but Vera doesn't even care at this point. She shuffles around in the feces and she pulls out a keyring. She says that he left her alone for half of a second yesterday and she saw no other choice, so she picks up the keyring and swallows it. And then she sits down with Vera and they come up with a plan. They don't say what the plan is yet, but they think about it and talk about it for hours. They just say it off screen or off page, I guess. And then it cuts back to when they are just about to enact it. They say that after this entire time of scheming, they don't even know each other's names. The woman says her name is Sandra, and Vera says hers is Vera. The plan is the following. They would whittle down that bone from the meat against the dresser's edge, and then take some of the blood from their wounds, as well as the dead fetus, and make some fresh wounds on themselves to collect some blood. Vera and Sandra would lie down and pretend to have been killed by each other. Some sort of dispute, I guess. It was unlikely that the slob would believe it anyway, but they tried to sprinkle some of the dead fetus and some fresh blood all over themselves. They did it at the same time, and Sandra stuck the bone in her ear so it looked realistic, as if they killed each other, all while having a little bit of a weapon just in case. While they waited for the slob to come back, they talked about how they got here. Vera talks about all the unlucky things that brought her into the situation, and Sandra says, well, she was just at a bar. She's single, so she started chatting up this handsome guy. He had salt and pepper hair and was funny and good looking, so she thought she was going to luck out tonight. But all of a sudden, she couldn't remember what happened. I guess she got drugged. She said it's weird, but she never even really thought about it up to this point, what happened. But before they can continue this conversation, they hear the heavy footsteps of the slob. They cover themselves in the blood in the fetus, so it looks like it was recent, and they both acted dead. This guy wasn't smart, so Vera hoped this would work. And as corny as it sounds, she's thought positive thoughts, almost trying to manifest this plan into working. The door swung open, and I guess that they both really did look dead, as the slob didn't say anything. But Vera and Sandra had their eyes closed, so they didn't see what he was doing. Vera just hears some thumps, as if he was checking to see if the body was dead by kicking her. Not very sophisticated. Vera heard the slob grabbing Sandra and started dragging her down the stairs, each thump her head hitting another step. Vera stood up and got to work, still only in her Billy Idol t-shirt. She hoped that the slob would take her first, because whoever got left behind was going to be tasked with leaving the room and taking the keyring to the gun safe that they'd seen. Vera had never used a gun, but Sandra had. Unfortunately, the person using the keyring was Vera, though. She creeped down the stairs and into the living room. She looked around for a second, but realized she doesn't have time for sightseeing. The slob was with Sandra as she walked around. She found the gun safe and quietly unlocked it. Inside, there was a pump-action shotgun. Vera didn't know how to use it, but Sandra had planned for this and told her how to use a pump-action shotgun while they waited for all of those hours. She grabbed it and did as Sandra said, and for the first time, it seemed like her luck was turning around. She looked around and heard some grunts. She followed them and saw the slob grunting naked over Sandra's fake corpse. His balls exposed, and they looked like they were covered in tumors, his tiny cock with warts all over it. It disgusted her, but she had no time for that. She snuck up behind him and the floorboard squeaked slightly, and Vera thought that that was it. But he was too engrossed in his work, I guess. She got even closer so that the spread wouldn't hit Sandra, and crouched down low and aimed the shotgun up high at him. And if things had gone as planned, that would have been it. But after all of that time, they didn't discuss what would happen when she was about to kill him. Sandra must not have seen Vera, or heard her, I guess, because her eyes were closed. So understandably, having enough of the rape, she lunges up, grabbing the bone from her ear and stabs the slob in the eye. And unfortunately, just as this happened, the perfect storm of Vera pulling the trigger happens, and she blows the poor woman's face off and not the slob's. And the slob recoils, now having a bone in his eye backwards, and he lands on Vera, knocking her out because of the exhaustion. Vera woke up an unknown amount of time later. She quickly realized that she was in the barn in the back that she saw. She looked around and saw that she was in a jail cell, with an almost cartoonishly evil-looking metal collar around her neck. It was bolted down and obviously unable to be reached. All around her, bodies piled up. All female, naked, and, for the most part, All of them were missing limbs. Looking through the bars, there was the slob in front of the vat. A vat of what looked like water mixed with female bodies just floating in it. The water was red and brown. There was also a table with saw blades above it like in the Saw movies. There was a spigot on the vat as well. The slob, who had not yet noticed that Vera was awake, turns the valve and it dispensed this red mush of bodies and water. He stuck his hand under it and licked his fingers, as if it were melted ice cream or something. He pulled out a gas can with the letters TYG on it. He filled it up and turned off the spigot and walked up to the cage Vera was in. He opened up the door with the key ring and kicked the bodies out of the way. He jingled the keys in Vera's face and then put them in his back pocket. He then derobed and showed his entire self. Bugs swarmed around his bush and, well, there's no way to say it, he starts to rape Vera. There was pus all over from his eye wound and some coming from his genitals, and right as it seemed like he was about to finish, to Vera's and my dismay, he vomits up the brown liquid all over Vera due to the motion of the thrusting. I guess it didn't sit well, and with all that movement of his lumpy body, it came up. All over Vera as he violated her. He finishes and leaves Vera covered in semen, blood, pus, and vomit. He then leaves his cell as if this was just a normal day at the office and leaves Vera alone. He would come back the next day and do the same thing. And the next day. And the next day. Days turned to weeks of rape and humiliation. Vera wondered if this is what her sister Lisa felt all those years before her death. Until one day, when he was finished, he threw some more bodies in the cell and left the jail cell. Something was making noises among the bodies, though. Vera thought she was going crazy, but she looked down and saw that one of the bodies had a Sony Walkman on it. It was playing New Kids on the Block. This was a very, very small relief for Vera. The little things made all the difference in here. The girl she grabbed it from looked very young, high school even maybe. On the tape on the Walkman it says, Bobby's Bodacious Mix in Sharpie. Vera thinks that, well, that Bobby will never see his Walkman or his girlfriend ever again. He then thought about Sandra. It was horrible what happened, but she knows if she thinks about it, it will only make things worse. It wasn't necessarily Vera's fault, but in the situation, shit happens. And then, Beat It by Michael Jackson starts playing. And Vera hardens her resolve and thinks she would beat it. And Vera meant literally. She was going to beat the shit out of this man until death. She then thinks of a plan and gets to work. She manages to get a few bodies close enough to her that she can get to them. She grabs the jaws of the bodies and rips teeth out of them, over and over for hours, and she feels repulsed. She was almost just like him now, defiling the dead. He is now in her in more than one way. She then saw a body with its wrist slit open. She grabbed one of the bones in the wrist, which I don't know the name of, and yanked as hard as she could, until her muscles ached, until finally it snapped off with a spiky end. Perfect. She then thought once again about Daniel. How, like his perfect storm of losing the use of his legs, now she has her own perfect storm. If she didn't get pregnant exactly when she did, and even a few days earlier, this wouldn't have happened. If she just let Daniel sell his car, this wouldn't have happened. If she just decided to work slightly more hours at the hotel, this wouldn't have happened. If that salesman never came to her door, this never would have happened. If she didn't ask for his card, it wouldn't have happened. If the higher-ups of the company were a little more greedy and didn't offer an extra $20 every 3 units sold, this wouldn't have happened. If she listened to Daniel about the 1 week thing, guess what? This wouldn't have happened. If she didn't choose to go to that one last house, this would not have happened. But now, she was here, and she was ready. Vera wakes up to see the slob standing right over her, already naked and ready. This was a daily thing. He jingles the keys in her face, taunting her, as he always does, and then forcefully shoved himself inside her, but something was wrong. Very wrong. He felt a horrible pain shoot up himself and pulled out to see that his cock had been sliced in twain. I love that word. When he was stunned by the strange and more than likely Theon Greyjoy levels of pain, Vera jumps up, grabs the keys, and throws the teeth in his mouth as he was screaming. Pocket sand. He falls over, not dead obviously, but choking and clutching at his genitals. She tries the first key. No dice. Second key, nada. Third, no cigar. He then starts to regain his composure, and thankfully on the very last key she manages to get out. But he was on his feet now and no longer choking. She had no time to lock him in that cage with the key. She ran up to the vat and climbed on some stuff near it, and he followed surprisingly gracefully. He jumped up and tries to grab her, but as he does, she ducks down, grabs the bone that she had hidden in her cavity, the same one she used to slice his genitals, and yanked it out, and in one swift motion plunged it into his lower jaw. She jumps down and looks for the switch of the buzzsaws on the table that he's on, and notices he's still alive above her, looking down at her like an angel almost, smiling. The slob tries to say something, but Vera tells him, "You are what you eat," which is corny, and then she turns on the table, slicing the slob to ribbons. Only his head remained and fell off of the table, which coincidentally is nearly unharmed. The head rolls near her feet and she spits in his one good eye, and as bad as it makes her feel, she goes over to one of the dead of the former prisoners and takes their jeans off to wear something on her lower body. Remember, she's been naked this whole time. She then takes the key ring, goes up to the barn door, and ironically, this time she guesses the right key the first time. She takes the slob's truck and is unbelievably thankful as she drives home. She steps out of the truck and onto the dew-stricken grass, something she took for granted until this very moment. She opens the door to her house with the wedding date of her and Daniel as the code of the lock and went inside. The house was a mess. It seems the weeks without her, not knowing whether she was dead or alive, made Daniel's PTSD flare up again. She looks around and sees that his car now had busted windows and cobwebs all over it. She looked at the table and saw a mess all over the house, and he was sitting there, alone, crying into his arm, with a bottle of whiskey. She goes up to him, and surprisingly, he's not dead like I thought, and she just smiles at him and says, "I guess it's time to clean all this up." Okay, the book's not over, but I want to say that these next two chapters are really, really weird, as I have zero clue why they are in the book. But maybe it's for the sequel that exists, but otherwise, I don't know why this is in the book. I'm just going to sort of skim through them, though. The next chapter opens up with that salt and pepper haired guy who doesn't have a name, who I will just call Pedro Pascal because that's how I imagine him to look, and he is at the bar with a girl. Remember, this is the guy that Sandra talked about. They toast their martini glasses and she downs it in 2 gulps. He slips the bartender an $100 bill and him and the woman leave. He offers her a cigarette, but before she knows it, she has been knocked out. He takes her in the car, which was very easy unfortunately because of the drug, and drives to a house, a farmhouse. He gets in and sees that no one's there. It's messy and disgusting as always, but he is not here. He goes to the barn and it seems normal, viscera and blood everywhere, but then his demeanor changes when he sees the slob's decapitated head on the floor. He freaks out and grabs a gas can and begins to pour it all over everything. He then takes the girl, throws her in the barn, and lights it up without any ceremony, and drives off with the fire in the background. We then cut to a mansion, owned by a man named Stefan. He is there with all of his friends, all gay men in an age where they were not treated well at all. They sipped drinks by the fireplace. You see, tonight they had a meeting and a party with a wealthy Japanese businessman named Matsuzaki. They had a plan to try to convince this man of the benefits of eating young women to absorb their essence. Quote, all the fun without the period. That's nice. Matsuzaki arrives in the mansion and asks to see the TYG, or the Tender Young Girl, meet. But as this is happening, Pedro Pascal also drives up and frantically tells Stefan that one of the women had escaped and killed the slob. This freaks Stefan out. They needed the shipment of TYG today. How else were they going to show Matsuzaki the benefits of the essence and get him on their side to sell it? So he does what any smart man would do in this situation and orders a pizza. They all sit down and eat nicely, and Matsuzaki even seems to like Stefan, laughing at all his jokes. Awesome. But after his pepperoni-filled dinner, Matsuzaki gets deadly serious out of nowhere and says that if they don't have any TYGs, they're gonna have to convince them themselves for this. The Japanese men were very respectful about all of it. They killed all of the gay men who were at the party and who they'd just eaten pizza with very quickly and without pain. They made sure not to get any mess anywhere and even cleaned all the dishes. They then fried up all of the bodies of these young men and ate them and were satisfied. They all wondered if this trip all the way from Japan was worth it, but Matsuzaki thinks, yeah, it was worth it. He liked those guys. They were very funny. And that's the last we hear of that plotline, and I don't know why it was included. Alright, final chapter, let's go. Things had finally gone back to normal for Vera. Or not normal, but as well as they could be going, I guess. Daniel was still reserved, but just happy to have Vera back. They cleaned everything and made everything tidy again. But Vera could no longer sleep at all. How could she? She would stay awake all night, crying, peeing, or vomiting. There was no way she was sexually interested after all that either. That would have to come years down the line, which was stressful for Daniel too. One day, after a particularly bad night, they went to the doctor, a specialist for Vera. She had to fill out a questionnaire and talk about what happened to him. After a while, the doctor came back in and then gives her the worst news of her life. Congratulations, Vera. You're pregnant. That is the end of The Slob. That's it. I don't hate the book, but it's on the lower half of my favorite splatterpunk books, probably. It was still fun to read, and it was really disgusting, as I always say. Now, before we go into the analysis, I want to read up the About the Author section of this book, because it's something else. Aron Beareguard loves onions. Despite his adoration for the layered vegetable, he often mispronounces the words. He could just cook them by themselves and eat them happily. Sometimes he will season them up and put them in his steak or his wine. He will eat them raw in salads or on sandwiches. Did you know that if you put an onion in your sock, it can heal your ailments? He does. He tried it and found himself licking his foot for hours. Did you know that onions give you a higher probability of having a nightmare when you go to sleep? He's heard that, but can't verify because most of his dreams he can't remember. It would be so convenient if he could remember his dreams, because that would probably help with his writing, and if the nightmare onion thing worked on top of that, can you imagine? Jesse, what the fuck are you talking about? What does that mean? Why did he include this as the About the Author note? Anyway, though, on with the analysis. The first message I can think of here in this entire book is about surviving trauma, and how difficult it is, and how it takes a real warrior to do so. Trauma isn't always physical either, obviously. It can be mental or emotional as well. Overcoming trauma is something that humanity is quite amazing at. Despite the horribleness of this book, humanity prevails. Surviving trauma is hard, but you can do it. Humanity is an enduring race, and it's on full display in this book. Control is another one. A lot of times, cleaning as a coping mechanism is used in the place of control, and the abyssal vacuum both gives control back to Vera, as well as takes it away. The last message I want to talk about here is motherhood. Vera goes through one of, if not the worst thing imaginable in this book with the loss of her child. But after everything, she endures. The loss of the child is an impossible task to deal with, and the last line of the book is probably the bleakest I've read in a while. How do you even deal with that? It's not Daniel's, obviously, it's the Slob's. But if there was one message that this book envelops as a whole, I think it would be, humanity endures. Thank you for watching. We've gotten a lot more subscribers and views lately, and you guys, each and every one of you that clicks that subscribe button, is a hero to me. You help make my dreams come true, even if you think that's not true. I value you, I really do. I love you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye.